Hey guys, this is Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com, and I'm here bringing you part 2 of a 25 no limit session I played last week. If you guys haven't checked out part 1, I definitely recommend watching that first. Basically, in part 1, I tried to go over all the basic or standard plays, maybe I want to say, which you should be making at these stakes against opponents who you don't have a read on just yet. Over here in part 2, as my reads are developing on my opponents, I want to show you guys how I will adjust and play differently against whatever tendencies I happen to notice. So I'll go ahead and let the video start running. I definitely get into a bunch of interesting spots a bit later in the video, but there'll be enough going on early on to make it worthwhile to play this. Obviously, on table 4, I'm just taking, color coding my opponent. Yellow for me is something a loose aggressive to maniac, anything along those lines. As I've mentioned in previous videos, definitely a big fan of color coding. You see, actually, if you look through the tables, almost everyone has some sort of a color code. Looks like maybe I got a bit lazy on table 2. But, yeah, most players have some sort of a code. Again, just so at first glance I could know whether I should be raising a marginal hand or not. I didn't bother pausing it on either one, but as you saw, I folded a few small aces from the small blind on tables 1 and table 4. If you expect the big blinds as a competent opponent, definitely a hand which just won't play well out of position, certainly fine to fold. So, over on table 3 over here, our opponent raises pretty small from a small blind, and I opt to just 3-bet him. This right now is still early. I don't believe he's played all that many hands at this table. I think he's newer to the table. And I just wanted to go over the timing of this 3-bet blind versus blind. Basically, if your opponent is trying to adopt a raise small from a small blind strategy against your big blind, it's something you want to discourage him from doing as early as possible. I mean, in the last video, I discussed, viewing your better raise sizings as kind of like a proposition. If you min-raise the button, you're risking 50 cents to win 35 cents. Viewing from his point of view right here, he's already got 10 cents invested. He's risking, it's the same thing. He's risking 50 cents to win 35 cents, and it's not something I want to let him get away with. If I'm folding, really more than half my range, or, you could figure out the exact math there, it's going to be very plus EV for him. So, I don't want to be exploitable blind versus blind. I have position. I'm the one who's going to be able to take advantage of him. So, early on, I want to set the tone that if you raise from a small blind, there's a good chance I'll 3-bet you. I wouldn't do it with absolutely any 2 cards. I want just a bit of value. Obviously, if this 9-4 is suited, it's still obviously a trash hand. But, suited value is something I could flop flush or flush draw. And also the timing is very important. I find that, for the most part, if you make a play against an opponent, the first or second time they raise in an obvious steal type situation, or the first or second time they 3-bet you, or in some sort of a spot where anyone who's, a competent poker player is going to suspect that they might be bluffing, opponents aren't quite sure how to react, whether you're an aggressive opponent or you're just, woke up with a hand the first or second time. Whereas if you wait until, roughly around the 3rd, 4th, 5th time that they raise, it's obvious that you're just playing back at them, and they're just much more likely to replay back. So, I find doing it earlier just because they just don't know what level you're on, or they won't assume anything from it. They tend to just, take the safe route and fold, whereas a bit later on, they're just more likely to assume that you're on the level that, well, this is the 3rd time I've raised from a small blind, he's probably playing back, and now he may 4-bet. That's obviously a reason to 3-bet for value in that kind of steal situation, but not as a bluff. And did I? Okay, I did hit play. It takes a while, and then he does just fold. So over on table 4 here, I mean, this is very standard. Even though my opponent is playing 45-30, he's playing a ton of hands, pocket sevens is pretty far ahead of he looks to be a maniac himself, pretty far ahead of his range. I just want to take a flop in position with it and try to get him to make a big mistake post flop. If he calls with King 10 or some sort of another marginal hand, he's not making much of a mistake at all. If he calls, I'm sorry, if he calls a free bet, if I free bet this hand and he calls. Whereas, obviously, if I flop a 7, and he calls a raise with a marginal top pair type hand and puts in a bunch of money, he is making a big mistake there. And also, we have the big blinds. He's been very aggressive, played a lot of hands, but he hasn't quite been free betting a lot. So, again, I feel like allowing the big blind to play, a pot with me where he might make a bigger mistake later on, not getting rid of a top pair type hand, whereas he's not all that likely to free bet and blow me off this hand. All reasons why, it is certainly a standard call. But, all reasons why I opted to still call against a looser opponent. And we see, in this situation with small blinds, just makes a huge free bet. I don't know exactly why he's doing it. A thought process, I guess, which might be going on in his mind is that this initial raiser is very loose, and maybe he's trying to get a lot of value out of a big hand. I'm not quite sure, but generally speaking, there's no reason to raise that big at all. Unless, you were 100% sure, a player's playing 100% of hands and he's certainly going to call your free bet absolutely regardless, then, sure, maybe you want to raise a bit bigger. But, just a kind of, I want to say, standard maniac or standard very aggressive opponent, still go ahead and make your normal raise sizings. Over on table 3 here, very standard open raise, regardless of who's, unless the button's free betting 100% of the time or something ridiculous. But, very standard open raise for value. And obviously we do have a weaker player in the big blind. On this flop, my plan is just to fire once and be done with it. Obviously a king or a queen, are typically pretty good turn cards for me as far as their overcards. If he's check calling once with like 8s out of position, and they give me a bit of equity. Against such a loose opponent, I probably wouldn't have bothered barreling them. If I did turn a 10 or a jack, I probably would have bet for thin value on the turn, because a decent enough part of his range is going to be flush draws. On table 4 over here, again, because my opponent is opening so loosely, and I expect him to make mistakes post-flop, I decided to call Queen Jack. I don't want, to allow weaker hands to stay in the pot. I feel like he might be opening just about anything on the button. He might be opening Queen 4 offsuit, something along those lines. Free betting him will, likely take him off those hands, whereas if I don't, he's, again, probably likely to go broke with a very marginal hand post-flop. So my plan is to play for stacks if I flop a queen or a jack, and possibly make some other post-flop moves, if the hand's somewhere along the lines of 2 overs and inside straight draw. We'll pause it over here. So again, we see that small raise over on table 3 against the same opponent with king queen a hand, which plays perfectly fine post flop. I'm gonna opt to just call it, not a hand which again, I'm still not giving him my blinds. I'm gonna be able to make moves post flop, whether it's floating, raising, or obviously calling, or whatever. If I flop a top pair type hand, and over on table 4. Our opponent checked this flop. I'm not quite sure why he's doing it. Again, I think he has a very wide range. I turned the flush draw. I still only have queen high. I decided to just bet the turn and evaluate the river. Not 100% sure if I would have fired the last barrel or not. Obviously, I still have plenty of ways to improve. With this king queen on the ace 10-10 flop. I flop back to flush draw, inside straight draw, definitely the type of board which I expect he's going to be c-betting with a lot of his range, and also again, just trying to get in his head a little bit. If he is making these small raises from his small blinds, I have to assume it's with the intentions of doing it with a wider range. So if his range is wider here, I expect him to be firing once with a lot of hands and check folding the turn. He's going to be check folding, obviously a lot of hands which are just weaker than mine anyway, like 8-9 or whatever, but small pocket pairs when I call here very easily can check fold a lot of turns, and obviously I could hit a jack to improve, or a king or a queen is a good card for my hand as well. So, I opened king jack offsuit over here on table 1, and again, we have 3 tight players behind me. Again, the color coding system, I see a bunch of purple and a red in the small blinds. So I know this is a spot which I could open a hand slightly wider than I usually would. I would consider King Queen my, quote unquote standard under the gun opening, open for an offsuit hand. King Jack, a hand I'm opening on occasion. So I decided this was a good spot for it. We end up heads up with a big blind, a relatively tight player, whatever. Two overs and inside straight draw. I do want to see bet. I assume I'm folding out my opponent's, ace queen type hands, maybe a smaller pocket pair like two sixes. Clearly I have equity of called, and I'm not going to be barreling this turn. First off, it doesn't change the board. If he did call once with eights or maybe a small overpair, obviously he can have a 10. He's very likely to call again. Also, if he called the flop with, a bunch of draws, he's pretty likely to call again as well. And I don't think he has all that many hands similar to mine in his range. I don't really think he's gonna have, King Queen probably makes some sense, but, King Jack or, something like, smaller straight draws. I don't think he has many marginal draws, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because he would likely fold, out of position against an under-the-gun raiser with, even possibly King Queen or King Jack. So I think if he does have a draw, it'll be at least a bit stronger, like Queen Jack or possibly a diamond draw, which he opted to not check raise. So if I do bet this turn, I'm gonna want to try to bet the river again to take him off those middle pocket pairs, or a slightly better draw. If he has ace jack of diamonds, I have to fire 3 barrels to win this pot. Well, he can have ace jack of diamonds, but a similar enough hand. King queen of diamonds, I guess, somewhat possible. A bigger flush draw is the point. So yeah, this is a spot where if I do want to, so I do think my flop bet was plus EV. Again, I think enough of his range is folding, which is a random completely with ace highs and the very small pocket pairs. But betting after he calls that flop bet, I don't think enough of that range is folding on the turn to make a turn bet plus EV in itself. I think I'd have to fire 3 barrels, and I only had a few hands on this guy. I have to just take I just want to say cautious line, or however you want to say it, and just go ahead and fire my once and give up, give myself a chance to improve on the river. Obviously, if I hit a queen, I'm going to have the best hands almost always. A king or a jack, I'll evaluate, but are certainly good cards for my hands. Okay, so over on table 2, we'll play it a bit. I mean, basically, he bets the turn. At this point in the hand, I opt to just give up on the pot. I don't think he's going to have all that many bluffs in his range. Basically just a king of diamonds if he opts to barrel it. I don't see him firing twice with any sort of a pocket pair. I think he'd check a evaluate. Obviously, it's pretty thin for value and not a great bluff if he has like 2 nines or whatever. And I don't think he'll bet this turn card. Basically, after I call this flop, my range is, I can certainly have an ace here, which I have to just call with, like an ace 3 or something. Suited, no reason I'd raise the flop. I'm gonna have a 10 here, or something, some sort of a draw. And in general, this turn card is pretty good for that range. Not a ton of double barrels for him, and obviously if I call again with such a marginal drawn to the second, not flush on a paired board, not a good line. I could consider bluff raising, but, I doubt him. It's a pretty spewy line, so it's not really something I want to consider all that much. Obviously, like a double float or something like that, but yeah, I don't think he's really going to be folding his hand by the river all that often with his king queen. So not a lot of money in the pot. Again, another situation where I think my flop float is fine. He's going to be check folding the turn with a lot of his range, but it looks like not the part of a range he happens to have right now. And again, over on table 4, I'm just going to go ahead and set mine with my 5s. For the same reasons I stated before, is trying to set mine for 7s, just a player who's likely to overplay a hand post-flop or deeper stacked. All good reasons to just try to flop a 5. Over on table 1, I'm not quite sure what he has when he bets so big on the river. Obviously, there's some... It's a bit suspicious, maybe he has a busted draw or whatever. It's tough for him to have a very strong hand on that. Well... It's not up anymore, so no reason to pause it. But obviously I have king high. There's nothing I could do. We'll pause it here, though. With the 7-8 suited, this is a play I think opponents or good players aren't making quite enough, and that's limping behind in multi-way pots. I think a lot of players are just in ISO mode. I'm meaning just isolate absolutely everything. There's some hands which, given stack sizes, things along those lines, just are gonna play well enough to call with. You don't want to fold, and you're not. The pot is already somewhat bloated by it being a multi-way pot. Obviously, it's not huge, but I'm gonna be able to bet pretty big flop turn river and get a lot of money in here if I do flop something, like a straight or a flush. So with some hands which play well post flop, but I guess we don't really want to make stack to pot ratio smaller. Something like a big card type hand, you certainly want to be raising with just to try to flop top pair and get the money in. But a middle connector, I'm happy with stacks still being deep. I'm going to be able to draw cheaper. Just, in general, make a lot of cheap, easy decisions on later streets with a hand which typically wants cheap and easier decisions. And again, like I said, I'm not giving up much value at all. If I do flop big, I'll be able to, pot flop, pot turn, pot river, and still get a lot of money in there. So, in a heads-up situation, had Magic Man folded and Alucard over there called, I would still raise, even though it's the same hand. In a heads-up situation, it's just, you get a lot more value from being able to represent a bigger hand, whereas in a multi-way pot, you actually have to have the bigger hands a bit more often. So, I'm not, basically what I'm trying to say there is, I raise heads up, the plan here with the 7-8 suited, if it does get heads up with Alucard is, everyone, the blinds fold, Magic Man's now not even a factor, and if flop comes, ace high, king high, dry, or whatever, I'm able to just c-bet and take it down, whereas now we have a multi-way pot. Once, if I raise here to, quote-unquote isolate, first of all, the blinds are going to be tempted to call, because now it looks like this will be a multi-way pot, and second of all, I expect both players to call, so I'll actually have to have the hands more often. Just having that extra fold equity doesn't matter as much, because it's not as much extra fold equity. Okay, and again on table 4, but we'll set mine one last time. This one works out for me. So, we'll discuss both my decisions over here. With the set on table 4, I certainly think raising is the best option. Again, against the Maniac, expect him to overplay one pair type hands. I don't, quite expect him to give up with a pair of 8s right here. When I do raise, I'm representing, very little more than a flush draw. I'm not sure whether he's on the level to realize that or not, but again, a player like this, first off, he might call with a lot of worse hands, which, I wouldn't expect him to, like maybe a king-queen or ace-king, which he just doesn't want to give up with just yet. And he's certainly going to get stubborn if he has a pair. So, definitely a situation, it's a drawy enough board. Certainly a bunch of wheel draws, a few middle connectors hit, like 6, 7, and the hearts. So, I want to raise to protect my hand against that. Certainly can get in against a ton of worse hands. And again, it'll be easier to just bet, turn, jam, river if the money gets in like this. Over on table 2, I opted to just call this min bet. I definitely think raising was an option. Looking back at the hands, it's fine. Obviously, I don't expect Magic Man to have all that much of a hand when he min bets this flop into 3 opponents. Having said that, I don't know if I can actually take him off that marginal hand. I don't know if he's going to fold ace-6 here, or queen 2 suited, or, just whatever. I certainly wouldn't expect him to fold a queen. But, maybe some sort of a middle pocket pair, like 2 8s. And, I'm not ahead with a flush draw. I'm sorry, straight draw. So, I guess this is a situation where, like I said before, the reason I called pre-flop is to just have easy, cheap decisions, and, I'm getting the right odds to draw up my straight. I'm just going to go ahead and try to hit my hand. Ace on the bottom table, obviously great turn card for me. Like I said, I expect him to be able to call off possibly just overcards, or, again, the wheel draw, maybe a nut flush draw, maybe an ace-10 or something. I think he'll hit it often enough. Well, I said it, I think I just said it was a great. It's not a great turn card. The rest of his range, like 8s or whatever, or more marginal hands might find to fold at this point. But it's certainly a good enough turn card in that. Obviously, he's still almost never ahead of me, and I think he'll hit it often enough to be continuing. So I decided to bet big. Obviously, the board's getting somewhat connecting, and just to punt up the bet sizing, it does give him just enough room to think he could ship over the top as, maybe some sort of a semi-bluff, or, to protect his hand and possibly unfolding. I bet 475, he could raise to about $9 more, which, seems reasonable that I could fold to it. But at the same time, I don't want to bet so small that I'm just giving him a really good price to draw at, whatever draw he might have. If he just I don't know exactly how he'd have a 2 or 3 in his hands, but, he's so loose, I guess he could have like 5-3 of diamonds or something like that. Or 4-3, same thing. So I don't want him drawn to any sort of a straight or flush draw cheap. And also, again, sets up a real easy river shove, possibly gives you illusion of fold equity, all of that. On table one, this is certainly a reasonable squeeze opportunity. I don't pull the trigger on it. Certainly can be considered something along the lines of the top of my folding range. Gets me heads up against Scotty a lot of the time, but I guess at the time I just figured, well, hot sauce is a tight under the gun opener, and I didn't bother getting involved. Or I believe I didn't bother getting involved. Yeah, I just fold. And on table two, we see our opponent bets really big on the river. There's some chance that I kind of dodged a bullet here, and he did flop something huge, or he possibly the small end of a straight draw got there on the river. Maybe he had 3-4. I really don't know what he had. But when these weaker opponents do take the like bet small, bet like just jam pot river line, I find that it tends to not be a bluff. Again, it's not universal. Certainly adjust to your opponents when you are able to pick up a read. But I had no real reason to believe that he was bluffing in that spot. Obviously, I just had a pair of eights, very much a bluff catcher. Pocket five is definitely jack on the river, not the absolute best card in the deck, which I guess would be a five. But I certainly don't think he has clubs or king queen often enough to want to check behind or anything like that. So certainly river value bet. And I'm not quite sure if we'll see, will it come up what he has. I believe he had something like ace 8, or oh, there it is, ace 7. So he did call the flop with just an ace high. So, there again is a reason why you do want to be raising a flop against a guy like this when you hit it, because they'll call with, absolutely ridiculous hands, which they quote unquote shouldn't. So, okay, again, we're still in blinds for sider players on the button, and over here, like I mentioned before, with high cards heads up, I do find a spot where I am able to isolate my opponent. And again, in a heads up pot now, there is more value in representing, my big pair here. This is a spot I'm certainly firing flop and firing, all scare cards, probably queen, jack, king, ace on the turn. Looks like, okay. Yeah, just grabbing another bit, standard tight aggressive player over here. Blue. So over on table 4, this turns into a pretty clear call. Even if it was a heads-up situation, I would likely call with the 2s here. But one thing we do know about our opponent is that we saw him make it 5 pre-flop before in that, small raised pot. So he's probably a player who overplays some hands. So I feel if I flop a set, I'm just much more likely to get paid against a player like that than against a player who will kind of, bet small on the flop of his entire range, and maybe in a single raised pot, find a fold with a top pair type hand or even an overpair. But against this guy, I think he's just going to be going broke whenever he has something pretty good. But far from the nuts, like a top pair or an overpair. Again, in a single raised pot, it is not a situation where you want to always be going broke. And obviously, because of a fish called along, it made it a very easy call, and just going to play straightforward post flop. Over here on table 3, I opt to just lead out with my flush draw. Again, very standard. I'm the big blind. I can very easily have hit this board with a 10 or a 4, and it's much more difficult for anyone who, I guess I want to say, wanted to play bare hands to hit this board. At this point, when I do get min raised against, anyone who limps under the gun is a weaker opponent. It's very difficult, or possibly impossible, to make that strategy work at 100 big blind short-handed poker. So, I'm immediately thinking that he's a weaker opponent. Why would a weaker opponent min raise this flop? And he's just likely to have either slow played a big pair pre-flop, or possibly has a jack 10 type hand, jack 10 or better, jack 10 for ace 10, which isn't folding. For the most part, when an opponent does have that kind of marginal overpair, I found, every time I'm in this situation and I have, I just randomly luck box with jack 4 offsuit, lead out and flop, they min raise, I go ahead and free bet big, they call, and then call off all their money on the turn, even though they know they're no good. But the point here being there's no semi-bluff value here. I have no fold equity, so I don't want to push my flush draw hard, or I don't want to play my flush draw aggressively at all in this situation. I am getting just about 4.5 to 1, so I certainly want to peel and see a turn card and try to hit my hand. But no fold equity. I don't want to try to represent before or anything like that. I want to see these players. They tend to kind of know you're representing before, but they don't fold anyway. So definitely a situation. Want to try to hit the spade. I check to him on the turn, and he just bombs out pot or whatever. Certainly looks like a strong top pair or slightly better, which he's trying to protect, and he does. So I'm just gonna have to fold. Over on table 4, again, like I said, heads up situation, high card type hand. I do want to raise bigger, or I do want to isolate. I do want to raise. I don't want to limp behind in this spot. And I flop my up and down straight draw. Tons of reasons to be betting this flop. Obviously, some better hands can fold. I do want to start building a pot. If I do hit a hand, we're over 200 big blinds deep. If I do make my straight, I want to try to get a lot of money, and I can continue to any reasonable check raise. So all reasons why that's a very standard, easy c-bet. So right now on table 3, if it's King Jack suited, clearly a very standard raise on the button, a pretty strong hand which will play well post flop. On a flop like this, if I was up against a looser, either looser aggressive or looser passive, it doesn't matter, just a looser opponent, period, I wouldn't bother c-betting. Obviously this board will connect with every single middle connector. Also a looser player can call with some sort of a more marginal hand. They're just more likely to maybe try to bluff catch with 2 4s on this board, maybe even call off overcards. Just generally speaking, they either hit this board, or they still might not give up if they miss, because they might have overcards. Whereas a tighter player, I expect him to, 1, hit this board a lot less often, even though he is just defending against the min raise from a button, which certainly puts a few more like 9-10 type hands in his range. I don't think he's going to be defending, very wide, like with a 7-5 or something along those lines. And also, he's just, much more likely to give up if he just has, let's say, King-Queen, a hand just slightly stronger than mine, or maybe Ace-2 suited. Again, there's enough stronger hands which I'm folding out. And also, by betting, it allows me to, I guess, more credibly represent much stronger hands. When I check behind this flop, I'm very much, capping my range. If I check this flop, I can't flop it. I didn't flop a straight, I didn't flop 2 pair, I didn't flop a set. Whereas when I bet out, I very well could have. The other thing about when he check calls this flop, he's now very likely to have some sort of a marginal type hand, like a pair and a straight draw, a middle pair type hand, which is trying to get to showdown, because the board's connecting enough where I'd certainly think if he did flop again 2 pair, set a straight, he's at least pretty likely, he's extremely likely to go ahead and check raise right there. So, given all that, I decided this is a very good turn card to 2-barrel, and if he check calls again, I would have went ahead and fired the 3rd barrel. Again, when he check calls this flop, he will have those pair plus straight draw hands. He's pretty likely to call him again on the turn. Again, something like maybe a 10-8 suited. Again, because he's a tighter opponent, I expect him to have the slightly higher end of the range of middle connecting type hands, but that's still something like a 9-10 or 10-8, like I said before. So I was, this turn card, my equity improves, it's a scare card, all good things for firing as a semi-bluff, and I do get the fold right here. But like I said, I would have fired with 3rd barrel had he just checked called again. And obviously everything very standard on table 2, raising queens for value on pre-flop against a very loose opponent, and flopping a set and looking to get in. But one thing I did want to say about this hand is we see our opponent there has ace-7, and I know a lot of my students have been curious about the times where a lot of instructors talk about when you raise, you're turning your head into a bluff. I think that's a great situation where Magic Man raising that flop with ace-7 suited, what he was doing was turning his hand into a bluff. If I had a hand worse than ace-7, I would have just folded. My hand was better, and I busted him. So there's absolutely no reason, given our dynamic, if you're up against an opponent who maybe won't believe you or will call a raise with worse than top pair, certainly you could raise top pair for value. But there was no reason for him to think I was going to call a. I doubt that was certainly a recreational player. I doubt he was thinking all that much, period. But if he was thinking about the situation, there's no reason for him to think that I would call a raise with the hand any worse than ace-7 suited. Here I decided to 3-bet king-9 offsuit. I don't quite remember this hand. Yeah, I do, and I think this is the right play. I opt to just check and try to get this hand to showdown. So, this was a loose, very aggressive opponent, but, his range is wide. I still need to be, I guess I want to say, playing back at him a bit, and king-9 offsuit is a reasonable enough hand blind responding against someone who's just playing a ton of hands. Over on table 1 there, it looked like I folded a queen-9 suited. That's probably a hand I could have isolated with, again, given a couple tighter players behind and a weaker player under the gun. With the king-9, obviously I turned 2 pair, very good turn card for my hand, and he min-bets out. So, certainly a very clear value raise. Ton of worse hands can call. Clearly a king-queen or a king-10, any ace-x, spade draws. So, a million worse hands can call. Unfortunately, very bad river, and we'll just go ahead and check and hope that he had the draw. I'm not going to bluff, and it's too thin for value. And unfortunately, he got there. It looks like on table 3, I opt to just fold my top pair with a player left to act behind me, and I don't think Ginobili's leading into the field, all that marginally. Certainly, he could have a worse hand, some sort of a draw, but top pair no kicker is not in particularly great shape against any sort of a range he could have, and again, with a player behind me, that's another reason to just get out of the way with no money in the pot. It looks like I opt to just take a flop with the ace-2 suited on table 4. Deeper stacked, it's the type of hand where if your opponent is folding to 3-bets or maybe calling 3-bets and check folding flops. Definitely a good hand to mess around a bit and 3-bet an opponent light with it. But at this point, I believe I just wanted to, 1, allow the other weaker opponent into the pot, who is in the big blinds, who is again deeper stacked, and 2, I expected my opponent would be calling the 3-bet a lot. Sure, and I wasn't comfortable enough with his post-flop tendencies to really know he was gonna call pre-flop and then fold the flop. So I have to just take a flop in position. And this does turn into, I believe this is the interesting hand on table 1. Well, I checked his 3-bet percentage before he actually did it. Looks like I knew it was going to happen. Yeah, on table 1, this is obviously a somewhat tighter opponent, but he is 3-betting with a reasonably wide range of 6% of hands. I had been opening a lot on this table and not been getting played back at for it, so he finally does opt to squeeze. It's ace-king. At these stakes, I certainly advise my students to be a bit careful with ace, king, and queens. You're very rarely going to get the money in good if you do play ace, king, or queens very aggressively pre-flop. However, there's certainly a time and a place for it, and it's generally in, steal situations or things along those lines. If you open ace king under the gun and some tight player from under the gun +1 3-bets you, you could probably just fold your ace king. But in this situation, I've been getting very aggressive. I knew it was a player who, even though he's on the tighter side, is capable of playing back against aggression. It looked like a very standard squeeze spot for him, and obviously I have ace king, a very strong hand. You can't go too wrong playing it aggressively pre-flop. So I go ahead and make a small 4-bet, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like around 2.5 times his, under 2.5 times his raise. I didn't expect he would have a 4-bet calling range, and here the hand gets even more interesting. And I'm, thinking about it now, I think I played it fine. I think my logic for the hand was fine, but you guys could let me know. The flop comes 3 6s, so obviously a very interesting spot. When I bet out here, I can't really bet fold, just given if I bet out. I guess if I bet out like $4, maybe I could fold to a raise. But even then, it's getting close. I'm just going to have very good equity against his range. I didn't expect him to be slow playing with me having put in a lot of money in the pot. I don't expect him to have 2 aces or 2 kings here. Obviously, a bit less likely with me having an ace and a king. And I have 7 outs against the middle pocket pair, ace, a king, or a 6, which is always nice, but 1 extra out on a flop like this. But basically, my thought process here is that I wasn't sure if he thought I was capable of 4-bet bluffing or not, but I just assumed if he had an ace-king or ace-queen type hand, he was going to be very happy to check it behind and get to showdown. And if he did have roughly, tens, jacks, or queens, more in the more in the middle pocket pair range. Again, I didn't expect him to slow play all that often, but I wouldn't say it's impossible for him to have queens plus. So if he had the middle pocket pair, I didn't expect him to fold it to my c-bet. Certainly not a smaller c-bet. So basically, I could either bet and commit here. If I do bet and commit, I wasn't even sure I was folding out better hands. I'm basically sticking a whole bunch of money in dead. Whereas if I check here, I thought I could comfortably check fold. If he bets, he's just very likely to have a pocket pair. And he'll check behind, the one slightly weaker hand than mine, ace queen, and I thought he'd also check behind ace king. I figure I'm occasionally just getting to showdown against that. So, I do end up. Well, I guess I'm thinking about a bet here and realize, the stack sizes aren't great for anything, and I opt to just go ahead and go up a check. And our opponent here bets out like half his stack or so, if I remember correctly. I think in general, his bet size is a bit big here. I like to bet small in these free bet pots, but obviously it's, fairly reasonable or whatever. I don't think there's any chance in the world he's, betting this amount looking to fold with having put so much money in the pot. So I do, somewhat consider, maybe I induced something, but again, there's nothing in his range which I could have induced from. I don't think he's calling a 4-bet with like 9-10 suited or anything like that. So, and I don't expect him to bet the ace-high type hands. So I think he's, maybe. I don't know. I almost want to say it's whenever I lose a pot to someone, I want to find a flaw in their play or something. It's fine. He's betting a bit bigger with what I would assume is some sort of a marginal pair he's looking to protect or whatever it is. So it's one of those hands where it feels a little dirty playing this hand like that, but I think my play on every street is fine. Okay, so I just skipped ahead about a minute or so. There was a whole bunch of downtime, and you see well, I guess it wasn't all that interesting of a hand. Over on table 4, I just went ahead and free bet again, that looser player with a queen jack offsuit. Again, not quite the ideal hand to be making a play like that. But my opponent was just opening so wide, I decided to add another bluff to my range, I guess is how I would say that. Over on table 1, I opted to just take the flop, even out of position with pocket threes. Um, I didn't think the big blind would be squeezing all that often, so I definitely felt it was fine to mostly set mine. And just to clarify that, when I say mostly set mine, if your intention is just 100%, you will check fold every single flop without a free in it. It's very close whether it's plus EV or not. I can't tell you 100% for sure, but I would suspect it might be slightly minus EV if your opponent's going to play well post flop and c-bet a lot. So you should be capable of mixing in a check raise. Whatever it seems right on, whatever board texture where your opponent might be representing a hand a bit too much or, floating out of position, just kind of however you can find a way to steal a pot from that particular opponent. And it looks like over on table one, I know I do keep the, I was only planning on recording for about 5 more minutes, so I decided to just stay at this table. But if you find yourself at a table like this, you're playing, just grinding a regular session, trying to make some money, and you find yourself at a table like this, it's time to get up. You see everyone at the table, they're all a bit too tight. But that's certainly not as big a mistake as being too loose. I'm not going to be able to make much money at these tables. As you see, roughly, I did get free bet with the King Jack offsuit over there. I'm going to be able to steal a bunch of blinds, and then one of these guys is going to free bet me and win most of that money back. So I'm going to be able to fund a small profit at this table from just being a bit more aggressive than these guys. But not like over on table 4 where we saw our opponent, call a raise with ace high on a flop and go broke for his whole stack. Just not going to be, particularly plus EV, just stealing a few blinds against a bunch of other tight players. You want to be playing at tables with fish for sure. And I'm assuming my raise sizing was a bit bigger than normal. I think I added an extra big blind. I'm assuming because we were close to 100 big blinds deep. Clearly raising for value at the 9s here, and this is likely a situation. I don't quite remember how this hand played out, but I'd probably be betting twice. Again, assuming my opponent could be calling this flop with a range slightly wider than just a queen, as far as flush draws, maybe a smaller pocket pair, which I don't want to give a card to. It looks like on table 1 I decided to... I'm not quite sure why I didn't c-bet this board. Obviously it's a reasonable enough c-bet against this opponent. I guess I just decided to give up for whatever reason. Which is, okay as well. On a board like that where I'm not representing a ton of hands, but, it completely misses my big card range. When I bet that flop, I'm only representing having a big pair, and as you see, I'm starting to run this first two numbers of my how to VPI pre-flop raise. Actually, that's probably the reason I did it, is that I'd raised, I don't know, 3 or 4 hands in a row, and I guess I felt like I probably was not going to be getting much credit anymore, as I'm now running at 30-27, which is the adjustment against tight players. You want to be playing a bit more looser and more aggressively, but, on a board where I'm not representing a lot, I thought maybe he'd realize that and play back at me somehow. Over with this Jack 10 over here, basically I'm just going to bet once at it again with his stack size. Yeah, a board like this, he's going to be sticking it all in on me a decent amount of the time. But particularly if he's not going to play his high card hands aggressively, if he's just going to play pit or fold, again, kind of viewing that bet as, risking 1 1/4 to win 175, he should be folding enough of the time to make that plus EV for sure. It looks like over on table 3, this could even be a similar type situation. I would often just free bet that hand there. I think it is the first hand we played blind versus blind, and again, it's, a suited Jack, not the trashiest trash hand in the world. But, I guess at the time I assumed he's just in it and probably wouldn't be opening, he wouldn't be exploiting me from a small blind or anything. Possibly it just assumed it was too likely he had a hand, so. Decided not to raise there. And, the last thing to say is that, you certainly don't have to make every single play. If you're raising every time you have, Jack 3 suited, or every time it's the first time your opponent raises from a small blind, you're going to end up just being a spewy maniac. It's just something you want to mix into your game, not kind of use it as a set rule. And we see again over on table 1, I'm continuing to just, raise a lot. And, players aren't playing back too much, but we'll see at some point, when they do finally free bet, it's just not all that plus EV to stay at a table like this. Or, when they will free bet enough, so. You certainly want to be playing with loose fish, and on a board like this, clearly it connects with his entire Broadway range, but, I'm not playing so loose that I can't get credit for having raised, every single Broadway hand hits this board. So I figured by betting here, I'm folding out 2s through 9s, most likely 10s as well. Clearly getting called by every single Broadway hand, but that's okay, and, clearly I'm representing a lot of hands. And now this was the interesting hand. This is kind of why I quit the session. I get free bet again by this guy, and like I said, I've been playing very loose and aggressive. My VPIPs at this point, after another couple of hands, closing in on 35. And the only adjustment you could make, I check his free bet stat again. It's at 7. The adjustment you want to be making out of position when players, or when you suspect it's time to play, the time when players are playing back at you. out of position, really all you could do is 4-bet and stack off on a spot like this. I've went up and back between, obviously the merit of calling here is that I'm keeping, I suspect my opponent is 3-bet bluffing a lot in this spot. So by calling, I'm keeping in all those 3-bet bluffs in his range, but with ace-queen offsuit, I'm still check folding the flop too often. So even though, yeah, sure, I kept ace-10 in his range, flop's gonna come king 7-2, and I'm gonna check fold to ace-10. So there isn't a ton of merit to that. The better way to adjust here is if he's 3-betting too much. I 4-bet, I'm going to be able to win just whatever money's out there very often when he doesn't have a hand. When he does have a hand and 6 it in, I'm going to be at a slight equity disadvantage. I'll be, roughly 2-1 underdog against his range. But, all the times where I pick up the 350, make up for that a lot, and just, in general, it's, being more difficult to play against, not allowing players to just... Because if I am opening 35% hands or whatever, if I'm going to fold to every 3-bet, I'm being hugely exploitable. Whereas if I'm 4-betting in a spot like this, I will be picking up a lot of dead money. It's not a minus EV play, and I'm also much more difficult to play against. So the reason why I said why I quit and got tilted here, the right play is to... I was thinking about it at the time, and, right when I decided to pull the trigger on the 4-bet and get it in, I timed out. So, I called it a session at that point, it looks like. I'm sitting at everywhere. Clearly we have to fold here. I guess I'll keep it on for a few seconds. Let's see if this queen 10 gets interesting or not. I don't quite remember this hand, so I guess it doesn't, but I can't tell you for sure. I do remember it. I just end up folding to the big blind over here leads out, and I fold. So, not an interesting hand at all, but, alright, I hope you guys, enjoyed this video. As always, feel free to leave any comments or questions in the feedback, in the thread. Again, this is, Neil Gewirtz with BluefirePoker.com.